Today, we welcome Brian Schwalb, candidate for DC Attorney General. Brian entered the race in December 2001 and has been endorsed by former Attorney General Irv Nathan, as well as Carl Racine, which is pretty powerful. Brian is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, whose membership is limited to the top 1% of area trial lawyers. Brian is currently a partner at Venable Law Firm, served as vice chair for 4 years, currently partner in charge of the DC office. He's provided legal and advisory services to organizations like Council for Court Excellence, the Abramson Scholarship Foundation, Us Helping Us, People into Living, a nonprofit committed to reducing the impact of HIV/AIDS in the city, its Black community, and the U.S. Holocaust Museum. I'll now turn it over to Brian Schwalb, possibly our next Attorney General. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the Rotary Club of Washington. Thank you very much, Sheldon and Mary Beth, President Bill. So it's a great opportunity to speak with you. My dad gave me a lot of really good advice before he passed away, and one pearl of it was that God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, that listening is twice as important as talking. And what I'm really hoping is we'll get a chance to have some Q&A and conversation, because I'm very interested in hearing your points of view about the city that I know you all love. I've been spending a lot of time talking to Washingtonians over the course of this campaign and learning that almost everybody I talk to is proud to be a Washingtonian. People love the city. It's a beautiful city. It's a city with great arts and culture and restaurants. It's a magnet for great talent. We don't have a resource problem in Washington, D.C. We're abundant in resources. What we have is a resource distribution problem. We don't share opportunities, equity, and income fairly across the city. And unfortunately, given the history of our city and our country, that disparity falls along racial lines too often. You all know the stats, I'm sure. A white family in Washington, D.C.'s wealth is 81 times greater, median wealth, 81 times greater than the median wealth of a Black family. We are roughly equal in terms of Black and white residents in our city, yet 71% of businesses are white-owned. 13% are Black-owned. If you live in certain parts of the city east of the river, your life expectancy could be 15 years or more less than if you live on the west side of the river. These equity challenges in our city, in my view, are the greatest challenge to our collective future as Washingtonians. And I think the law in the hands of the right lawyers is the most powerful tool we have to address the gap in equity and opportunity and income that we have in our family, in our city. The law is like a shovel, though. When you talk about a tool, it can be used to bludgeon somebody over the head or to dig a hole deeper than it already is, or a shovel can be used to till the earth and help things grow. That's why the decision of who the next Attorney General for our city is going to be such an important decision. The Attorney General has a very significant portfolio. As Sheldon mentioned, it was for the last 8 years held by our current Attorney General, Carl Racine, who was the first independently elected Attorney General. It was very important for all of us who live in Washington to have a chance to vote for and have an Attorney General directly responsive to the people who live here, like states across the country that get to vote for their Attorney General. Let me tell you just very briefly about myself. As Sheldon indicated, I was born here in Washington, as was my mother and my grandfather before her. The family story was that he played the fiddle to put himself through medical school. I don't know if that's true or it's just become family lore, but it's become the family lore. I've got 3 daughters who are also born here in Washington. So 4th generation Washingtonians and my daughters. We love this city, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful place to live and raise a family and to build a life. But as I alluded to, that's not the same experience that everybody in Washington had. I came back to Washington after a clerkship to join the Justice Department and have been actively practicing law for the last 30 years. I've had the great good fortune to represent a wide array of clients, businesses, individuals, and families. I've handled criminal and civil matters. I've handled multi-billion-dollar civil disputes, and I've represented a young man on death row in Alabama, and pretty much everything in between those 2 poles in terms of the practice of law. I've also been able to engage in leading lawyers at Venable, both as the firm's vice chairman. We have more than 800 lawyers, 1,200 people across the country, and for the last 6 years as partner in charge of our DC office. My wife, Mickie, and I had the great fortune of, when I came back to Washington, to be able to buy our home, and we've lived in the same house for 30 years. I was recently talking to a woman named Brenda who told me that she lived in her house for 30 years as well. And then she asked me, do you know what my dream about my house is? I thought she was going to tell me that she hoped one day she could own her house. But what she told me took the air out of my lungs. She said, after 30 years, she dreams that one day she can walk around the block and feel safe. We all deserve to feel safe in our neighborhood and in our homes. And too many people in our city don't feel safe. And that's the number one goal of any government, is to make sure people are safe and feel safe. We have an election that is going to be on June 21st. That's the primary for the Attorney General and the Democratic primary. And for 3 reasons, I think it's a really important election this year. First, as I've mentioned, this is the election after 8 years of Carl Racine serving as Attorney General. Our state AG office, our Attorney General office, is widely considered to be one of the premier state AG offices in the country. The level of talent, the level of quality of lawyers and legal professionals in the offices is the admiration of many places. One of the reasons is because Washington is such a magnet for talent and lawyer and legal talent that comes to Washington. When the statute was first passed to make the AG an elected office, there was a concern about it becoming a politicized office and just another agency of the city as opposed to an elite law office. And it is not, in my view, an office that should be used as a stepping stone to running for something else. The administration of justice in our city is too important. We need to make sure that the next AG carries on the same type of excellence that's been in the office for the last 8 years. So it's an important election for that reason. The second reason is we're about to emerge from the pandemic. I think our city, as many of us know, is at an inflection point. Almost every one of us who has children or knows how hard it's been to learn over the last couple years online, even with the best of resources and Wi-Fi and quiet space and supportive adults to help, kids have fallen behind. But for many, without those types of resources, kids are falling out. And when kids fall out of school and in touch with school, they're at particular risk for getting caught up in the criminal justice system. This Attorney General in the District of Columbia is responsible for the juvenile justice system. We have a bifurcated system in Washington. Adult criminal justice handled by the federally appointed U.S. Attorney, juvenile justice by the AG. It's going to be a really important time when we think about how are we thinking about our kids moving forward? How are we making sure we keep kids away from the criminal justice system? When they do start to get brushed up into the system, how do we get them back on track? And for kids who are doing things that are dangerous, whether it's carjacking or using guns, we need to hold kids accountable with swift and certain consequences for behavior. But even when we do that, we have to make sure that we remember kids have brains that are developing. They're making mistakes, and they need room to be able to make mistakes and get back on track. We need to give them resources to rehabilitate, because when we rehabilitate, we make our city safer. In my view, we don't make ourselves safer by locking people up. We've learned that over time. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a job during the pandemic or a business that's closed. As we emerge from that economically, it's going to be very important that we make sure we have a level playing field, that the law applies equally to everybody in the city. There's going to be a temptation for people to rationalize cheating. We're just trying to get back on our feet. We don't have to comply with the rules. We don't have to pay our taxes. We shouldn't have to pay our employees. The next AG is going to have to lean in and make sure that everybody plays by the rules. And that's good for everybody who's running a business and lawfully and putting the hard work in, because there's nothing more corrosive to business than knowing some people are getting to cheat while others are playing by the rules. We're going to get a once in a generation amount of money coming from the federal government into our city, $3.3 billion. We all know when that much money comes into any place, DC or anywhere else, there's all kinds of opportunities for mischief or worse. And we want to make sure that those dollars get to the people in the programs who need them more than anything. So that's critical that our next AG lean into that. We've got a court system that's completely clogged and backlogged. Because we're not a state, we're down 16 judges on our Superior Court. We don't have the kind of control of our justice system, and when people can't get justice through our system, they start to lose faith in democracy. I was talking to a gentleman named Roger Marmot who lost his son to gun violence. He was maybe you read his article in the paper recently about the fact that the police were able to catch the people who shot his son, and we're going to charge them with second-degree murder. Because of the clog in the courts, because what happens to witnesses and documents and evidence over time, the prosecutors decided ultimately to make a much lower plea. And Roger was quoted saying, "I have no confidence in the court system. The justice system is failing me." It's a real risk to our democracy. So for all those reasons, we've got some real critical challenges as we come out of the pandemic. Final reason this is a really important election is our democracy across the country is under attack. Turn on the news, you see voting rights, civil rights, reproductive rights are all under attack. There's a rise in hate, whether it's Islamophobia, white supremacy, anti-Semitism. All of that finds its way to here, DC, the seat of our national democracy. I can promise you that AG Racine, when he ran for AG back in 2014, had no idea that he would end up suing the President of the United States under the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, or having to sue the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. But that's what happens. This is not just a local election, it's an election of national importance, and why it's so critical that the next AG be ready to serve, have the lawyering experience and the leadership experience day one. So for all of those reasons, I'm running. I think it's a very, very important time in our city. I'm bullish about Washington. I love the city, but we can't deny the fact that we're facing some serious challenges as we move forward. And the excellence of our chief legal officer and the attorney general, I think, is really critical to making sure we meet those challenges and put them behind us in the right way. So with that, I'm going to heed my dad's advice. I'm sorry for talking as long as I did, but I really do want to hear from you. If you have questions or comments or thoughts about what you're seeing in the city, your businesses, things that the Attorney General's office does, and I'm so very, very appreciative of a chance to meet you. I hope everybody will vote on June 21st. It's important to vote. This year, ballots will be sent to all registered voters, so there'll be an opportunity to do early balloting, and I hope I'll earn your support, but mostly, I want to hear from you now if you have some questions or comments.
My name is Kenny Barnes, and I too have had a son murdered in D.C. I have just two questions. I'm going to follow up. One is, violence can be looked at as a legal problem or a public health issue. I would like to know where you stand on that. And I would also like to know where you stand on continuing the lawsuit against Donald Trump.
Sure. The two questions from Mr. Barnes were where do I stand on continuing the lawsuit against President Trump? And the answer is that suit is going to be continued and aggressively prosecuted. In fact, I think it probably will expand as the facts surrounding January 6th and what happened on January 6th come to light. The question about gun violence, and I'm very sorry to hear about your son, as to whether it's a legal matter or a public health matter, and the answer is it's both. We have to address when people are committing crimes, particularly violent crimes, with our legal system by holding people accountable. There have to be consequences for behavior, and that's true whether the people committing crimes are adults or kids. I think our system has to recognize a difference between adults and kids, given the fact that for whatever decision, our law draws a distinction at 18 in terms of the difference between being a kid and an adult. I can tell you as a man, my brain, if it's finished developing at all, didn't stop developing till I was probably 25, 26. But we have an arbitrary number in our system of being 18. When someone younger than 18 commits a crime, we are committed to making sure that we are rehabilitating and doing what we can to make sure kids come back into living a life that's productive and lawful. And that means resources while they're being punished or being held accountable. But the point about public health is exactly right. We cannot prosecute and arrest our way out of the amount of guns we have in our city. We are awash in guns. They come into the city through the porous borders, mostly from Virginia. We've got ghost guns that are being created with online 3D printers. There aren't enough resources to prosecute and arrest everybody with a gun, which means we have to think about it in terms of how do we keep people away from guns? How do we keep people away from thinking they need to resolve their disagreements with guns? I have a mentee that I've been mentoring at the Abramson Scholarship Foundation. When he was 15 years old, he was shot and he was paralyzed. Shot in the neck. He was paralyzed for about 18 months. He now is able to walk and run again. He still doesn't have full use of his left arm. But he's going to graduate this spring from Morehouse with a degree in business. And I was at the Wizards game with him over over the break, and I asked him, I said, Deontay, what's going on with people, using guns? And he said, here's the deal, Brian. My generation doesn't know how to use our words. We don't know how to resolve disagreements and resolve disputes with our words. And so while we're beefing with such a proliferation of guns around, people pick up guns and they resolve their disagreements by shooting each other. Used to be if you got in a scrap, the worst thing that happened was you came home with a bloody lip. Now with so many guns around, people are dying. So we need to think about how do we keep young people away from guns by investing in them, by making sure that all kids have a chance to see what they're going to be good at. Not everybody wants to go to four-year schools, nor should they. We need to invest in vocational education and opportunities for to apprentice so that people can see they can make a working living wage, even if they're not going to be four-year college students. We need to make sure kids, when they're out of school, have times to do things where they can exercise, they can try new things, and they can be in a safe place to make mistakes and grow. We know adolescents are naturally finding their differences from their parents and becoming decision makers and oftentimes making bad decisions. That to me is the public health piece of it, looking at it more holistically and trying to get to the root causes of why people are committing crimes. We don't make ourselves safer by being tough on crime. Got to be smart on crime.
I'm Dr. Scarcella. My question will be only yes or not. As Attorney General, do you have a power to work to become, for the DC to become state? I don't know the answer. I don't know if that is related to the power Attorney General.
The answer is yes, but not with flipping a switch. It's not under the automatic control over the AG. It's about leading the city in a way that's going to make it so that our Congress, if and when our Congress is ready to get over partisan politics and focus on things as to whether we're ready to act like a state, we have first-rate governance, we take care of our business like the states, then making the case to that to the Congress, because ultimately it'll be a congressional decision.
Thank you, sir. Just question, is the rate of crime in D.C. Going up, staying the same, better than it was before?
So interestingly, if you look over all of the data that's being gathered over a 30-year horizon, we are safer today, and the levels of crime generally and juvenile crime are lower today than they've been historically. We had very low levels of crime across the city during the pandemic. What we have an uptick in, though, is in some violent crime categories. Not all violent crime, but carjacking and homicides have ticked up. And so it's a result of that reality that we are having an increase in some violent crime in the city, that people are justifiably scared. People are making decisions where they go to pump gas, not just where the cheapest gas is, but where they're worried about getting carjacked while they're pumping their gas. And that's something that the government has to step up and do something about, because people deserve to feel safe. The fact that the data shows that we're not any more dangerous today as a city than we were 30 years ago doesn't make people feel better.
Hi, this is David Krukoff. I'm actually running for office as well. I'm so glad you're here today.
Good to see you.
What is your definition of a juvenile? What should be the definition of a juvenile? And it's widely perceived from the people with whom I speak, which is hundreds, if not thousands, that crime is the most important issue in our campaign right now, and that the John Marshall level of the Superior Court has been ineffective for the past couple years. Would you comment on what is a juvenile, what should be a juvenile, and on the John Marshall level's effectiveness in the past couple years, please?
Sure. So, look, the definition of a juvenile is anybody younger than 18. That's our legal definition, and as Attorney General, that'll be my job, is to work with that. There are suggestions that that number should be raised, recognizing that even at 18, people's brains are developing. I don't think any time in the near future that's going to change. There's a very important piece of legislation that's pending called the Definition of a Child Act that involves really a home rule issue for us in the city, which is when kids who are 16 or 17 commit violent crimes, are they tried as adults or are they tried as young people, as juveniles? And right now, that life-altering decision, anybody who knows anything about criminal justice knows that if somebody's thrown into the adult system as a young person, it's a life-altering decision. The only chance for young people to be rehabilitated is if they're treated like young people in the juvenile system. That critical life-changing decision is made by a federally appointed U.S. attorney right now. And the definition of a child act that's pending before the city council would put the decision into the elected attorney general. And I can tell you, I do not relish having to make that gut-wrenching decision as your attorney general. But I think that decision should be made by somebody elected by you, responsive to you, so that the decision, whatever the consequences are, the community has a say in it. So that's a little bit on the juvenile justice. Now, in terms of the family court, when you're talking about the John Marshall level of the Superior Court and where our family court sits, we spent a lot of time talking about why our criminal justice system doesn't work as well as it should. I alluded to the fact that we're down on judges, and so we have a terrible court clog problem, which gums up everything about the way the Superior Court works. We've had terrible problems with our Department of Forensic Sciences. And so any case that involves ballistics or fingerprints or DNA have now been thrust into uncertainty because we haven't taken care of running that agency the way it should be. Our system involves MPD closing cases with admissible, constitutionally obtained evidence. It involves AG prosecutors bringing cases and closing them. It involves judges reacting to the facts. And we've got a very good public defender at the PDS in this city, thank goodness. So all of that filters into whether or not young people are being efficiently approached in our juvenile criminal justice system. There's a lot of room for work to improvement, but I don't think you can't point the finger at any one thing. We've got a combination of factors right now that are making that a really difficult challenge for us. And good luck with your race.
Thank you very much, Bill Day. You started your talk by mentioning the growth disparity in wealth and inequities in wealth. In my view, that's not an accident. It is in significant part a result of judicial and legislative decisions. I think that the people on the upper end of the scale are pretty happy with the way things are, and they're the ones who write the laws, and they're the lawyers, and they're the ones who staff the courts. So question is, why do you believe they want it to change, and why do you believe it will change?
Well, look, I think people much smarter than I have said that power doesn't cede power without a demand. And, that's the reality of our history as a country. But fortunately in DC, we have very good laws already on the books. We are a city that has very pro-tenant protections, and we need an AG that's going to aggressively enforce them. Current Attorney General Racine has done that. Holding landlords who are not taking care of their properties and their tenants accountable, landowners who are engaging in unlawful practices accountable. We have, I think, very good wage protection laws so that workers are not having wages stolen from them or being misclassified as independent contractors when they're employers. They need to be aggressively enforced. That's why the decision of who the Attorney General is so critical. We've got good environmental protection laws. Again, they need to be enforced. And we've got one of the best consumer protection laws in the country. And there are too many people who are being scammed, particularly seniors who are being taken advantage of, financial exploitation, consumers who are being scammed, predatory lenders. We have the laws on the books to try to narrow the equity gap by enforcing those laws. The larger question about whether or not some people are content with the way things are and whether they're really ready to change, that's a more philosophical, longer conversation for us to have maybe afterwards. But the laws we have on the book, if enforced well by talented, hardworking lawyers in the AG's office, can narrow that equity gap in our city.
We have a tradition as a club of planting a tree in the honor of each of our speakers. We have something called Trees for the Capitol. And over the last 30 years, we've been planting trees down at the tidal basin, cherry blossom replacement trees, and also more recently, retreeing downtown parks. So we'll be planting a tree in your honor in partnership with the National Park Service. We obviously don't own the land and we have to work with them. And it's our foundation that funds those trees. Again, thanks to the DC Foundation. So it's been great having you here. I should have a tree certificate, and maybe I can hustle up one shortly. But anyway, you have my personal pledge to plant the tree, and we will be inviting you to the next tree planting ceremony, which will probably be in May. We're waiting for that date from our friends at the Park Service. All right, so without further ado, I officially adjourn the meeting